team here, Leslie and Jessica, are going to go through a timeline of the major events of the Pacific Theater during World War II. At least that's what I'd like to say, but Leslie and Jessica couldn't make it today. Turns out, on her way back from vacation, Jessica got on the wrong plane and is now in Africa. I don't know how long it's gonna be until she can come back. Probably 3 weeks. As for Leslie, I only have a couple ideas as to what might have happened to her.
Time to go to the studio. No! Oh my God.
Be sure to listen well. I'm not going to repeat myself. I am not going to go through this on my own, and here we go. Even before World War II, Japan had been trying to expand its territory into China. Japan's main concern was taking on the Soviet Union because they preoccupied Manchuria, China. Japan took over this land in 1931 and continued to fight China each year until the end of the war. At the same time that Japan was fighting to expand, it was also trying not to provoke the Western nations that it so heavily relied on. With Japan being just an archipelago, there are many kinds of resources unavailable on its islands. This is why it relied on trading with nations like the US for valuable resources like oil and rubber. The Japanese effort to keep the West off their back failed in 1940 when the US placed an embargo on them. The export of steel, scrap iron, and aviation fuel to Japan was prohibited. This was all due to Japan's takeover of northern French Indochina. In April of 1941, Japan signed a neutrality treaty with the Soviet Union to prevent any attacks from that direction, just in case war was to ever erupt with the US or Britain. In June through July of that year, Japan occupied southern Indochina. Because of this takeover, and 2 days after it happened, the US, Britain, and the Netherlands froze all of Japan's assets, preventing any and all sale of oil to Japan. Near the end of 1941, because the American people did not want to go to war to stop the Japanese expansion, the US government demanded that Japan withdraw from China and Indochina. The US had to settle for a token withdrawal and a promise not to take more land. Before December 1941, Japan had two missions. One, try to get the trade embargo lifted, and two, prepare for war. At this time, the Japanese military was okayed to devise a war plan in anticipation of US declaration of war. They planned to sweep the Southeast Asian islands in order to form a perimeter around the Pacific and take down Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, which was seen as a threat to their entire plan. On December 7th, 1941, Japan took Pearl Harbor by surprise early in the morning. They bombed US ships and sank 8 of the battleships while damaging or destroying over 350 aircraft. That same day, the United States of America declared war on Japan.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory.
Later in December 1941, the Japanese began their offensive on the Philippines. The US forces stationed there took a big hit, losing much of the American bomber force on the ground in Clark Field. General MacArthur and his troops struggled to fight back. March of 1942, the Japanese took over multiple islands, including Indonesia. At the same time, MacArthur is forced out of the Philippines, leaving behind hundreds of troops. He vows to return and makes his retreat to Australia. Later in June of 1942, Japan attacked the Midway Islands in an attempt to gain an advantage. But they didn't know that the US had 3 carriers out at sea near Midway. The US saw the Japanese coming, and the battle ended in favor of the United States. dealing a crippling blow to the Japanese Navy. April 1942, American and Filipino forces at Bataan in the Philippines surrender. The Japanese capture all forces and carry out the Bataan Death March, forcing thousands of these POWs to march through the peninsula, killing stragglers for fun and denying most of them water and food. Some torture was also carried out on these POWs. By March 1943, the Manhattan Project had begun, starting the race against time to create nuclear weapons in order to possibly end the war. October through December 1943, General MacArthur and the 6th Army make a return to the Philippines, where he delivers his I Have Returned speech. At the same time, off the shore of Leyte, the Battle of the Leyte Gulf is fought. Here the US carries out the largest naval battle in history, effectively destroying the Japanese Navy. From 1943 through 1944, the Allies fought their way through the Pacific perimeter that Japan had created, taking back island nations one by one. The Battle of Guadalcanal was won in February 1943, and in the summer of 1944, the Allies were already close to Japan. The Battle of the Philippine Sea was fought off the coast of Saipan in the Northern Mariana Islands in June 1944. The air and sea battles lasted 2 days. When the battle finally ended, Japan had lost 3 aircraft carriers, hundreds of planes, and over 96% of their troops there. January through March 1945, MacArthur and his 6th Army, which at this time was the largest army the US had ever sent into any one battle, began their invasion of the Philippines, sweeping through and defeating the 250,000 plus Japanese troops defending there. In February through March 1945, the United States invaded the island of Iwo Jima, taking on over 20,000 Japanese troops in order to secure airstrips for their B-29 aircraft. The war in the European theater had already ended in mid-1945, but the war still raged in the Pacific. The next offensive took place in April through June 1945. The US fought long and hard to take over Okinawa Island in order to secure land for an invasion of mainland Japan. Over 12,000 US troops lost their lives, 36,000 were wounded, and about 70,000 Japanese soldiers were killed, followed by over 100,000 Japanese civilians caught in the crossfire. By now, the creation of the first nuclear bombs had been reached, and US troops were on standby to attack the Japanese mainland. President Truman ordered the dropping of the atomic bombs, however, in order to prevent thousands of possible deaths throughout the US forces. The first bomb, named Little Boy, was dropped onto the city of Hiroshima on August 6th of 1945. The second bomb, named Fat Man, was dropped onto Nagasaki 3 days later. The bombs destroyed over 50% of each city. On August 14th, 1945, the Japanese officially surrendered, ending World War II. And there you have it, guys. Just about everything anyone would need to know about the timeline of the Pacific Theater during World War II. We hope you learned something today. We're not gonna say it again. Thanks for watching! See you guys next time!